Great. So we chose this morning's session to focus on enterprise software. We felt it's really timely and interesting, really in light of the recent regulation around personal data, GDPR. So this is the General Data Protection Regulation that kicked off in May and has really been very strongly felt in different layers of the sector. I mean, it doesn't only concern how companies have to adhere to the policy and maintain consistency and privacy for personal data, but really changes so many aspects and layers of business interaction, how businesses and organizations deal with customers, and how they're looking forward to make sure that their systems and protocols are in line with GDPR. Now, today, we believe that the three companies that we present here today all have, on some level or other, have to deal with GDPR and had really significant changes to their business as a result. And I'd like to take the next kind of like 10 minutes for each and every one of our esteemed CEOs to present themselves and kind of like what their companies are doing, just so we can set the stage for our kind of like in-depth discussion. So with me today, we have Nimrod Luria, CEO of Prifender. We have Amnon Drori, CEO of Octopai, and Yariv Tabac, CEO of DBmaestro. I'll hand it over to you. Take a couple of minutes, just share with us a little bit about your background and what the company is currently facing.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. Happy to be here. So my background is around 20 years of experience in security. I'm building my own company since 2009. And I saw in privacy that it's a big change in the market, not just by the GDPR or the fines that we are all afraid of, but it's a great opportunity to understand that the data is the new currency, that we're trading our data. It's the new gold. We are mining for data. There's a lot of companies doing data mining, and the data is everywhere. What we build is a solution as enterprise software that can map all personal information across the network. And the problem is that the data is everywhere. It could be in your emails, it could be in folders, files, databases, Salesforce, cloud, and the problem is to know where the data is. And actually we developed that software that answers a very simple question, that show me all the data that belong to customers, to vendors and employees. This is pretty much it. Today we're serving the largest organization in the world, and it's really interesting to see where the market is going through. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Amnon Drori. My background is not 20 years, it's 19 years in the enterprise software. My background has to do with like Zend Technologies, Panaya, all around enterprise software and helping organizations to manage their data. Our company, Octopai, was born about 4 years ago, and our relevance to data management has to do with the business intelligence side, where a lot of companies are focused on the data side, on the application. There's a very important role that connects the data to the business users. And between the business users and the data, there's business intelligence. And one of the things that we have found is that business intelligence are a very important, or they play a very important role in moving the data from the applications to the business users. With specifically relevance to GDPR, they are responsible as a last mile of the data that is then being shared with the business users. So understanding where the data is, how does it flow, where does it come from, and where is it going, is a very, very critical part in that.
Morning. My name is Yariv. After I heard these two about 19, 20, I realized that I'm really old because I have 30 years experience in this industry. Too much. Those folks speaking about protection and how to control the data, DBmaestro is my third company, and we are dealing with how to automate the transition between the data. Because today, most of the organization wants to work faster. And when you work faster, you need to automate every process. DBmaestro is focusing how we automate the shipping of the databases between the environment, how to control it, how to govern it, because today when you want to work fast, most of the time you need to compromise about the quality. So when we're coming to our organizations, we have around 50 customers all over the world, Fortune 1000, banks, insurance companies, government, and we are protecting them to do harm to their databases, to avoid downtimes, but most and not least, to govern when you're shipping your data from one environment, from the test to the production, and vice versa, to where you're doing that, and to block it.
Thank you. So, I mean, just to explain a little bit more, share from why these companies are so, they're really in panic. I mean, all these companies, they've been working well before, GDPR was passed. And I know for once, I personally probably received dozens of emails from every single vendor I've ever interacted with since I was like 18 or something, really within hours of when the GDPR was in session. And you see these organizations panicking and trying to understand how to navigate in this new world. Now, to talk a little bit about the fines that we just heard a little bit about. Complaints about GDPR violations were filed within hours against companies like Google, Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram, which had significant financial consequences. I mean, if these claims are going to be validated, these organizations are potentially going to be fined as high as like $9 billion just in fines against GDPR. If we look at some of kind of like past cases of breaches of information of companies, we can talk about famous breaches like the one happened last summer, Equifax. So that particular breach, for instance, where over 140 million people's personal data was compromised and over 200,000 people's credit card information was also compromised, this kind of violation can present a fine of about like $120 million, and there are many, many more examples. So companies are really panicking around how to deal with this new requirement. And what I'd like to do next is really kind of like turn to each and every one to understand how this really impacts the business. Now, when I first met Nimrod, I think one of the first things he ever said to me, and it really made me click, like a lot of Simonim like fell down that second. He said, just think about what happens when you go to disconnect from your cable company. Okay, you go and you say, okay, fine, I don't want to work with you anymore. I'm moving to a different cable company. Where is my data? Do they even know? Like across, as he said, emails, the support center, the call center, things that were recorded, weren't recorded, across distributed databases, where's my data? When I say I'm walking away, please delete my data, does the organization even know what to do? And that, realization is very significant. Now, Nimrod, share with us a little bit about how, what are the requirements, what are the challenges that need to be implemented in these organizations?
So what we're seeing in the last year, we're working on the company for the last 2 years. I was really excited to see, okay, what will happen post the May 25th? That was the due date for GDPR. So the feeling was like people compare it to back 2000. Now the problem was that it's not the same because now there's enforcement on that. So companies was panicked about, okay, what does it mean for my company? What does it mean to be ready for GDPR to the due date? Now we're talking about very large companies that have like 50 years of IT, very complex environments. And what we saw in the last year, that many companies did a lot of legal work and advisory services to try to map all the data. Because like PCI, like HIPAA, you cannot do everything at once. You need to understand where the data is that belong, for example, to customers. So what we're seeing is first to know where the data is, as you said, to map the data. The problem is that it's all done manually today. There are some technologies, as we're now talking about it, that helps you to automate that process. So first is to know where the data is. You don't need really to do GDPR for the entire organization. You need to do GDPR for the specific location that might manage personal information. So the first thing is to know where the data is, to reply for, as you said, data subject access request. This is something that is really important. Data subject access request is something that you need to reply. We've seen companies, the large ones, getting like hundreds a month. Some of them just even get one a week. But those things need to be replied very fast to the auditors when they ask for this. And the last thing that I will say is the post-breach. Companies fail to respond on the breaches. By the GDPR, you need, in average, to respond in 72 hours. And it's a big challenge for companies that, for example, a file was leaked. The file is just with numbers. And you don't know who's the data owner, what the data belongs to what system. And it's really hard now to manage the whole process. So what we're seeing in the market, that because of the 72 hours obligation, now they're announcing the entire customers, the whole company stakeholders, that there was a breach in order not to violate, because you need to inform only the EU citizen on that breach within 72 hours. So bottom line is...
Do you think the time is really the limitation, or...?
It's not the ability to respond, because until now, if you see Cambridge or the other breaches that we had, they announced it to the news like a year after the breach really happened. Now you need to respond in 72 hours. Based on our research, is the minimum that it takes, it's in 3 weeks. That's really fast for large enterprises. So to do it with 72 hours is failure. It's something that they cannot do, and that's actually a pure violation of the GDPR. So first I will say it's to know how to respond on a breach, but not to notify the entire customers. So you need to know who are your customers that are obligated under breach notification. Yeah, that's the two things that I will focus on right now.
Okay. So Amnon, a question for you. You're addressing BI units. So where did that challenge meet the BI unit?
Well, as I said, the business intelligence is kind of the last mile before they kind of release the data to the business users. Now, I can share 2 use cases that I think will kind of demonstrate exactly what we're talking about, aside of just the technology. A lot has been spoken here about automation. And one of the ways to balance the time and manual work is to implement automation into the processes of those companies. Now, the fortunate that happened to us is that we were able to leverage technologies that will enable this automation. So the 2 use cases I can share with you, and just like my folks here, we're selling to large enterprises. If this is telecom, insurance, banking, gaming companies, that at the end of the day, they need to show a lot of capabilities with regard to GDPR. The 2 that are really interesting is the automatic process recording, the ability to understand at any given point of time how the data flows. And the other use case is what we call data element correlation, which is one of the biggest headache for any company. And what I mean by that is that think of a report that shows customer name, but in the database it's being called CC, and in between, through the systems, it's being called Shem Lakoach, or I don't know how to say it in German, but probably you know, but at the end of the day, to understand that a certain data element can be named in different names, even though they carry the same meaning. So on something that is very popular, the right to be forgotten, or you want to change things in the database or the applications themselves, eventually 95% of that data flows through the BI. And why? Because the executives that are liable to the data, because of auditing or whatever purposes it is, also get the BI to be liable to the data as well. So as we say, to cover their ass, as they say, they want to be able to get a grip at any given point of time about the data movement process. Where is it coming from? Where is it going? And how is it called? And it can be in different names. And this automation is something that has been implemented very, very rapidly. And that was our compelling event last year and flowing on to this year as well.
So it's exactly to be able to follow the seller, to follow the data type, or like
right.
How you call it. But, and this is, I just want to share, it has a lot of implications, super important, because just think that if it's called different things in different places in the organization, then if I have, for instance, a customer that's called John Smith, how do I know that this is the John Smith that I actually meant? Because there could be, duplicates. So it's critical to understand if the customer number is the one-to-one identification, to be able to follow it across the different layers of data in the organization.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Which leads me to the next question, Yariv. When we're talking about databases or managing metadata, how organizations want to construct the architecture to be able to support such a kind of like sophisticated data management. So what do you see in terms of the large organization's ability and requirement to manage database protocols, database architecture, database versioning? Where do you see that?
When we started our journey, we started that from the automation, like all the other folks speak about, how to move and how to make it, the shipment between the environment faster. And then we went to the market, and one of our customer, Bank New York Mellon, told us, look, folks, you have fantastic product, but it is for a single solution, only one application. And we want to control in enterprise scale a lot of applications, a lot of databases, a lot of metadata, huge number of environments, and we want something that can copy our policy and enforce it on the process. And when we're speaking about GDPR, we're speaking most of the time about how we control the endpoint data. But in the second tier, there is something that is very important, the process enforcement, and to where you are shipping the data also. And this, when we started our journey into the GDPR, so what we did is for an instance, one of the most critical paths for automation product is the capability to integrate to a lot of environments, A and B, REST API, connectivity, all of that. What we did, we integrated to all the policy environment of the organization. We store the policy in DBmaestro, and we enforce the process. So for an instance, no one can ship something that is not allowed to another environment because of the policy. Now, when you are dealing with a lot of databases, a lot of environment, something will happen. 100% it will happen because you cannot close it. But when you are having automation tools with a very strong security and policy that can block every shipping, every movement, every single action, and you block it according to the policy, you are giving the organization, our customer, our partner, the ability to control it, to govern it, and also we audit it. Now, in most of those kind of organizations, we need to understand in the enterprise level, the integration, be a part of a process, is something crucial. We are, for an instance, integrated to the Security Operations Center. So if something happens, we raise flags. We notify to all of the other stakeholders, the CISO, the CTO, the CIO, if something is happening. Not all the databases, not all the data has the same strength, confidentiality, or the other sensitivity. So we need to be much more clever and faster to react. And this comes with the 72 hours, by the way.
Which I think is really the challenge. So Nimrod, tell me, let's dive a little bit into some of the technological challenges and discuss that. Can you tell us about additional use cases of data management other than personal information that you see?
Sure. What we're seeing is that organization can make a lot of money by just collecting data. We're all aware of the fact that in the last 2 years, we collected more than we ever collected in the last few decades. Now, we understand that data is the new currency. The question is, again, as I said before, where the data is. To be able to know where the data is and how to use it, that can generate a lot of new revenue streams to organization. I'm not talking now about how to prevent fines. That's good. But some organization can say, you know what, I want to spend more money to make more money. I don't want to save money. So what we are giving...
I agree. I mean, $100 million in fines might sound like a lot to us, but it's really nothing for some of these huge corporations.
Yeah, correct. So they want to spend 200, but to make sure that they will not have a data misuse, for example, like Facebook. Now, to be able to know what can you do with the data, like data sharing, as Yariv mentioned, or what kind of campaigns you want to manage, it's like being able to drive the car with the car, but having the brakes to stop when it's needed. So that's what we're doing. We will give you an insights about what can you do with the data. So if you have a campaign, for example, that you want to run and to spend a lot of money on that campaign, but to make more, we will help you not to misuse the data and make sure that you do it based on what you can do, based on your privacy notices and so on and so forth.
You define it per customer. You define it together with them based on their requirements, their policies, their constraints.
Yeah, it's more complex than just a customer. It's a matrix. It's a whole matrix of is that containing EU citizen, what the data is for, is that just campaign, what you're using that for. So we can understand the context, the risk involved, and understand the policies, and to recommend what you can do with the data.
Excellent, thank you. Amnon, let's talk about some aspects of your technology, like, for instance, extraction, homogenization, some of these like nice and big words.
Absolutely. Where everybody wants to get a grip of the data, you need to remember this is the end result. The journey to get there is maybe very, very painful. And when I previously talked about available technologies, one of the things that specifically enterprise companies kind of suffer from is the ability to react fast. And in order to enable that to them, you need to rely on very modern technologies that will enable the automation of that process. So automation is a big word, but what is it that you need to do in order to get there? So our role is very much not about the data, it's about the metadata, which give the data context. If I'm going to ask you, could you give me 20? The second question you would ask me is 20 what? And we can go all day what this 20 represent. And this is what we call metadata, the description of the data that gives the data context. Now, in a given organization, there's about, in the smallest one that we've started work with, there's about 6.7 million data elements. In a medium-sized company, it can be about 30 million. So finding that among 20, 30, 40 different BI systems is almost impossible. So the automation, when it comes in place, is first of all the ability to centralize. One of the things that we've recognized is that you cannot go system by system. One of the things that will enable you is to socialize that metadata that is disparate between different systems. So the first challenge that we had was how do we collect all that metadata into one place? The second thing, if you cross that chasm, is what do you do with it? How do you analyze it? How do you bring sense to the metadata that can be captured from Oracle and IBM and Informatica and Microsoft and Hadoop and so many different tools? It's like complete chaos. So this is why we've used a couple of layers of technology like path analysis and progress analysis and machine learning capabilities, that the collection of that is like the ability to give sense to the metadata, so you can do two things. First of all, find the data. Where is it? When I'm being asked, where is the credit card field, or is it CC, or is it Kartis Ashrai, where is it? The second thing is to connect the dots. So where is the flow? How do you ways the data movement process between so many different systems? And today, I'm very happy to say that after running the product in the past 2 years among a couple of dozens of clients in those enterprise industries, we see that they can generate this flow, this map, within 5 seconds. Not 5 days, not 5 weeks, and sometimes not 5 months. And these are true numbers. In 5 seconds, they can get it. And this has to do with, I think a lot has been spoken about the technology. Let's talk about the psychological part of this compelling event called GDPR. We talked to a lot of CDOs, like chief data officers or CIOs. And I can only quote somebody from Gartner who said, well, your company can be valid to any enterprise if you cover one of the three. You make them money, you save them money, and you keep them out of jail. And you're 2 out of 3. You save money, you keep them out of jail. And if you have an available technology, they will adopt it. So it's the right technology at the right time.
That's good recommendation to any entrepreneur here in the audience. Keep companies out of jail and you'll have business for life. Yariv, can you share with us some aspects of your kind of like process automation, logging, things that can be invaluable to organizations when coping in these kinds of situations?
Yeah, sure. When we did the statistics about the penetration to organization, we knew that, but we got it again. 80% of all the penetration coming from inside the organization, not from outside. This is the reality, by the way. Now, what's happened to the database development in the past 5 years, it was something amazing. because at the beginning, you know all the DBA role. All of them know the database was silo. There was the master of the kingdom. No one can change the databases. No one can change nothing, by the way. If you want to make any change, you need to be in the line, ask for the change. They are doing all the job for you, and you get the result. Good, bad, this is the reality. But what's happened with the agility and all the kind of the high velocity and the need for a lot of releases, it was a distribution of the role of the DBA into the developers, because the developer in politically way don't want to wait to the DBA. They want to do it their own. When you're trying to distribute the role and you try to and you give them the power to change, you can lose your control. So what's happening is, again, when I'm speaking about the policy, the security, and the auditing, this is the main game here. What we are providing to our customer is the ability to track after each change of the database, not only in the data side, but also in the schema, what we call the program, because there is 100,000 of code line stored in the database. You can make changes. By the way, everyone can make changes in the database. We providing all the organization providing all the privilege to do that. And then you need to track them. So from our perspective, what we did here is to enforce a very tight policy and provide the DBA and the DevOps manager, which is something that is quite new in the ecosystem of all the enterprises, the ability to control, to govern, and we are storing logs. We know every change, who did it, why did it, according to what was before, what was after, and we are track it, and we are notified to all of the others environments.
So I mean, I think it's really interesting to understand like more specifically, because all of you guys have amazing logos, Fortune 500 customers. Let's talk about specific examples. So for instance, Nimrod, some of your customers are giant e-commerce, multinationals, and for them to actually be breached, I mean, of course, there are the elements of how do I save money or how do I keep myself out of jail, but there's a lot of like brand equity involved. Like how do I, protect myself from like being very visible to the public, for people to start talking about, how this brand that I'm so associated with, that I use every single day, are compromising my personal data or bank account or credit card information. So can you tell us maybe one prime example of a customer that you've worked with, and how do you see a use case for this specific type of customer?
Yeah. So again, I will stick to the two use cases that I mentioned. I will refer to the sentence that you said to keep them out of jail, but I will say also to keep them out of news. I don't want them.
I agree completely. Yeah. This is it's like not all news are like good news. Yeah.
That's it. And the bottom line is that if we see that there is a breach, like Mark Zuckerberg, he's published a whole page, right? We will not deserve to serve you if we cannot keep your data. So we want to give our customers the ability to manage the breach if it happens. As you said, most of them coming from the internal, some of them coming from the external resources. There's no way that you can say, I will prevent the breach for 100%. The bottom line is to understand how you can mitigate the risk involved and to protect the brand. So what we will do for those customers is to give them the ability to respond to a breach and and keep it as confidential as they can. If they were able just to inform the customers that was under the breach, they don't need really to go out to the news and public and make it public. So that's the manage the risk and the exposure. And the second is to make the customers happy. You will see very soon, I believe in early next week, some of the giants giving you the ability to see the data they're collecting on you. You saw Facebook did it partially, Google did it partially, and you will see the others coming and giving the customers the ability to control the data. And I'll give you an example. Let's say that you have decided to get an application for free. So this is your decision, and this is the big change in GDPR. This is your decision to trade with your data. You get an application for free, you give in data for free. Now let's say that you don't want to give your data for free, and you paid $1. So now you have the ability to say, I don't want to share my information. I paid you $1. Please don't share my information. And we will help them, the organization, to keep that and to control.
To keep the data anonymous.
That's it. Not just anonymous, and make sure that if you paid $1 for an application, we will not use the data, we will not share the data. But
do you think the most users are, like, do they understand really? Are they sophisticated enough to understand, well, I got the app for free, so that means that my data, is running wildly in an organization? Do I trust
Right
the way that
now,
they're managing the data? Don't I trust it?
Today, well, I believe that we give up for privacy. Because I remember when I was at Microsoft, I was one of the large conferences there. It was TechEd, and I showed that how we find a bridge in the map, that I can find where you are. Today, it's a feature. So we somehow give up for privacy, but very soon, you will understand, all of us here will understand that we can make a lot of money just from the data that we give in now for free. So now we'll say, you know what? I want to either pay you the $1 or either get dollars, but I want to decide to do something with that.
Okay, so Amnon, so your customers are actually banks. Many of them are insurance, like huge insurers. So these kinds of organizations are required to have data protection, data management solutions well before GDPR. They're highly regulated. So is the impact on these kinds of organizations as meaningful or as severe as some other organizations, or how do they need to continuously step up in how they manage their data?
Well, if you talk about this type of an industry, one of the things that any customer, or you deal with any customer, either European or the US, is the right to be forgotten or the right to delete certain data. You talked about use case. Let me give you one of them. We work with one of the banks in Europe that one of the rights that their customers have is to delete how many transactions have I made during the past year. I don't want you to know if I'm active, reactive. This impacts, by the way, how much money you pay to that specific bank, and this is how they understand your behavior. And then they correlate it, and then they affect the pricing, just so you understand the change of reaction. So if I'm that bank customer, I don't want the bank or people in the bank to know how many transactions I've made in the past year. Now, this is not just a data element. This is actually a calculated element, which means who you are, when did you log in, what transactions you've made, and then you get a score. I don't want anybody in the bank to know what this score is. And to make it a little bit more complicated, the data elements that represent the score is being masked. It is being called 1B. So how do you track that 1B that relates to you? So the ability to become more sophisticated, not because of efficiency, and the GDPR kind of empowered the users, the individuals, small people, against those banks, so you can have the power to enforce them to do that, very much relies on technology. So this is just one use case that enforced the bank to become more automated and have more layers of understanding about where the data is and how you can delete data of a specific person that has to do with understanding how you behave.
It's very interesting. Thank you. And I think, Yariv, you also have huge banks as customers, and I think another element, or kind of like the flip side of how they're dealing with the data, is kind of like where they're storing it. And some of these organizations, because they're traditional industry, because they're like, legacy, they have a lot of legacy, like huge mainframes, like old databases. They're trying to, and I know this from working in an organization that was developing ERP products, just to onboard to a customer, to do data migration to new databases, or to upgrade any type of data solution could take years. So I'm sure another element, another challenge is really how do they deal, the DBAs have to deal with these old legacy mainframes, computers, servers, that actually have to add on top of those, the new solutions or the new innovative approach for data management. So where do you see that?
First of all, one correction. Today, the DevOps manager is taking over the DBA actions, by the way. I want to put things in the line. I'll give you two examples from the past month that we had with two huge customers of DBmaestro. The first one is ADP. ADP is a huge payroll company in the States. By the way, 20% of all the government is working with, and they get the payment through ADP, so it's a huge. We started the journey with DBmaestro with them several months ago, and it was a bit challenging because it's huge enterprise. The most significant application there is called N8. N8 is the billing application. It's the most sensitive and it's the most high-profile application, and from our luck, we got it. We preferred another application, but we got this primary application, and we started DBmaestro. And we asked them in their day KPIs how long it takes them to ship one release from in their environment, one release. They are doing that once in 5-6 months. How long it takes them to do that once they suggest? And they told us it will take them between 3 to 4 days because they need to check, to move, to check again, to see if something is happening, to work with all the environments, and if everything is working good, it's a touchdown. Last week we did the second roll with DBmaestro. It took them 46 minutes. From 4 days, 46 minutes, because everything was automated, governed, secured, stored, audited, and they took it from one environment, from the development to the production, 46. Now, when I spoke with Matt Sanders, the VP DevOps, he told me now we are going to ship instead of one release in 5-6 months, one in 3 months, and we want to do it one in a month. But we need to automate it. This is the first thing. So that's the beneficial that they got. The second thing, the second example that I will give you is a small company called T-Mobile in the States.
Tiny.
And small company. Also, we got all the SQL Server environments, and when Nimrod spoke about everything, I realized what we did there. Suddenly, we got from David Waste, the head of the DBAs, message, I wrote it in my LinkedIn without the name, that according to the policy, they figure out that one of the developers build a side sandbox, a side environment to work. He's working with all the data, everything, and for his own experiments, and they figure it out, and they block it. Of course, it was HR process after that, but they found it. So it's bring me that to the beginning of the discussion. We need today to work faster. The cycles are faster. The challenging are more. There is increasing of the challenge, and the faster is, in one hand, causing us to get a lot of compromise in the quality, and we cannot afford that to us. 72 hours is nothing. Is nothing like that.
Okay. I think, from everything that we've heard, what we're understanding today is that data is really transformed from being companies and organizations' biggest assets to sometimes a liability or a challenge of how to manage in terms of customer expectation, regulation, et cetera. And where you're saying, that the data is the new currency, always throws me kind of like to the blockchain worlds, and how other kind of like themes are trying to deal with privacy, with ownership of data, with ownership in general. And I think what's really interesting is that there are new models of maintaining or keeping or owning data. And will organizations choose to own the data, or maybe they're going to choose to lease the data? And today there are already models where companies can choose third parties, organizations to store the data, to maintain it in a consistent way, to be able to analyze it, to be able to pull information from it in a way that's it's anonymous, that it's consistent, and there are already kind of like the first signs of these models coming up. They're called data trusts. And IBM and MasterCard have kind of like introduced the first ones called Truana, that with the hopes of kind of like to manage, to anonymize, to analyze data for different types of organizations. So essentially, maybe where organizations used to monetize on data, the whole approach of how to access data or how to lease data will be completely transformed. With that kind of like provoking thought, I wanted to open up to some Q&A from the audience. Yes?
Forgive me if my question reveals my ignorance, but between you three companies, is there sort of complementary activity, or are you competitors on some level? And the second corollary, I didn't hear much about breach of security in any one of you, like I hear from companies that are actually expert in breach and counter breach of security. And apparently one of the biggest culprits is North Korea.
Let me start and...
Go ahead,
So what I think is that first the problem is so huge that you need to be very specific on each of the problems. There's no one solution for personal data management or for GDPR. I think we all talked about breach in a way. I was talking about 72 hours response. Yariv was talking about getting some visibility and with the use case that he mentioned. So what I think is that the bottom line, and I was always saying that, if you're able to protect the data at the minimum, meaning that at the lowest level, sorry, not the minimum, meaning that you can protect the road, you can protect the cell, you can protect the very specific data element that is confidential, that is personal, then you're protected from any breach, because a breach can happen in your network, in your host, in your application. But if you protect the data element itself, then it's a breach. What I'm hearing from, we're all portfolio company here, and there's, I believe, no competition, because what I'm hearing is each one of us giving some very unique approach. My uniqueness, my company uniqueness is the identity level, the DB, and how can you say it in one word?
Metadata automation.
The metadata. So we are all completing from here. I'm definitely going to speak with the people here to do some partnership. We talked about different names here. So mobile companies, they really don't know what the data they have. You're talking about data it move, but sometimes they don't know even what they have at rest.
I would say that I think, first of all, we're friends here. So, but aside of that, I think that we're complementary products. One of the things that we've seen is that the depth that our customers need to get into, they could not find a single, vendor that can really cover everything. And if they do, then they kind of think, should we get a one single product or best of breed? I think that due to the latest development of the needs, you can see three different companies that may meet at the same customer but fulfill different needs along the food chain. I think that the trick is to be able to integrate and to cooperate together to provide a holistic solution. So you can see, products like data governance. Data governance are using metadata management automation for business intelligence. So are we competitive or are we collaborative? Or operational risk management that has to do with more of the auditing type, but they rely on technology. So I don't think we're competition. I think we have a very good way to collaborate together in order to provide a holistic solution for the customer, which eventually needs to find how to collaborate everything together.
I'll start with the second question about the security. Today, security is, cybersecurity is something is very broad, with a lot of layers. And today, when we are startups, and our aim and our customer looks for us a very focused process, a very focused product, that to solve a very accurate and bright pain. That's what we are doing. Now, according to security, as I told you, the layers. Every company here is touching another layer in this broader solution. And when the customer, it's like you are going to the doctor and you have suffering from several aches. You need to determine what is the most critical one to you, and then to solve it, and then it's like a process. So, of course, there is no There is cooperation, not competition here, because every one of us is focusing another slot, another solution. And for the security, as Nimrod is in the identity, the metadata, we are for the processes. It's all complete one puzzle.
If I can add on his comment, I think that one of the things that you would witness is that whereas in security, there's hundreds of cybersecurity companies, and you're asking yourself why. And then the explanation is that you can see different layers and different scope, that you can use 50 different cybersecurity companies that complete the puzzle. I think that notion has started to drill into data management as well. Data management is not one thing that you do. It's a collective of a lot of things. And the need to manage the data, basically what you just said about the notion of using the data, which was just shchuna for so many years, is now becoming more and more managed. How do you say? Neighborhood? Yeah, shchuna seems like more juicy. Yeah, so shchuna is more juicy. So I think that data management is being recognized to be very much to understand the different layers and the scope of the data, very much like cybersecurity. So the ability to drill and to cover very, very accurately specific aspects of the data management creates so many different companies because of the notion that data is not just one thing.
So does it mean, would you be stronger if all you three musketeers would be joining forces?
Maybe.
That's where we come in.
You can see an evidence in the market for what you just said is that companies like Informatica, they're doing data management for decades, but yet companies using startups to solve their problems. Why not using huge companies like Informatica? Because they need to solve something very specific.
Yes. A question?
Yes, the question, which buying power are you selling to in the enterprise?
Which buying power you're selling to in the enterprise?
We are selling to the chief privacy officer based on the maturity model of the organization. Some of them don't even have a chief privacy officer, like you mentioned, chief data officer or CIO. So it's based on the maturity model of the organization. If they're mature enough for privacy, they will have the chief privacy. If not, it will be the CIO, general counsels.
Typically, we sell to the head of BI, which is the very poor guy that is responsible for signing off the data to the business user.
Downstairs in the dark room with no window.
Yeah. And in some cases where the company is kind of mid-sized, very much on the CDO, the chief data officer. So our product can be either for the efficiency part or for the keep you out of jail part. Very much depends on what pitch do we choose, the FUD, the fear, uncertainty, and doubt, or the efficiency. So this is kind of the layers. We don't go to the CIOs, typically, no need. And if we need to, we go there.
We are selling to the IT, to the head of the infrastructure, head of the DevOps, or head of the applications.
Question? Yes.
Hi, in regards to free app accounts, what happens to the data collected if you want to opt out of these free app accounts, and can it be deleted?
You can request for data deletion. Depends on the law for each country. For example, in Israel, you cannot delete finance information up to 7 years. But you're eligible to request all the data that belongs to you if you leave a company. Or data transfers. If you want to move from one company to another, you're eligible to get all your data to another company. So,
but does the old company keep your data still?
So now you have the right to request for deletion, data deletion, and they will need to respond to that based on the law. So if you will ask, they will expose to you what they're keeping, and they will tell you what they can delete, or if they cannot delete it, they must mask it. At least nobody can see that data. But if the auditors or some government offices will ask for the data, they can provide it. But they must encrypt it or mask it at least.
Talking about, say, for example, Facebook.
Yeah, so right after the due date of GDPR, Facebook got 9 billion, 8-point-something billion fines because of citizens and users that want to get that privilege. So you're allowed to ask it. They must provide you a feedback, and they need to give you like an opinion what they can delete or not based on the data that they're collecting.
Yes.
Do you support data to action? For example, you collect data for a certain customer and for like marketing purposes or something like this? Because you told me that you're selling your product to the CTO, right? But do you use the data for I don't know, marketing like Google ads or whatever?
Okay, so we have different users for the systems. Some of them, yeah, they can be for marketing, and we will give them visibility of what they can do with the data, not to violate the data misuse.
What's the difference between your solution and MDM? What's the data management
Well, the answer is within your question. Master data management is about how you manage data, and our business is what we call the EMM, Enterprise Metadata Management. So we are responsible for this layer that is carrying the data from the data itself, which is where the data is being managed. And we manage the metadata that is the shell of that data. So the ability to walk through the data movement process by understanding the naming of the data, what you call metadata, is our business. So what we've seen in the past years is that everybody talked about data, but how do you call it? How do you keep tracking it? And this is where metadata management, metadata itself, and metadata management in specific, has gained a lot of traction in the past 2 years and is almost as equal as the data itself. So our part is on the metadata management.
Yes.
A couple of comments. First of all, GDPR is applied differently in every one of the EU countries, and the degree to which a regulator responds to a breach depends on local policy. So there's a unified policy across 28, soon to be 27 countries. And the country that's, let's say, most proactive, which is the United Kingdom, the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, has said very clearly that it's not going to go crazy over compliance. It's going to be relatively light-handed, and in particular it says, but this is something that's actually true for the whole GDPR, the 3 days required is from when the company becomes aware of the breach. It's not a question of when did the breach happen. If it happened 6 months ago, then we're automatically out of time and we're going to be fine. That's not the case at all. And the other thing that's very important, there's a new regulation that's planned, called the privacy regulation, that is meant to complement GDPR. It's still being worked on. It's going to complicate the picture for everybody because it's going to apply not to consumer data, but to all the other data that companies have. So this is something that you've also got to take into account in designing and marketing the product.
The California law as well.
We're seeing also the California law, so everybody are following the GDPR, and I agree. We just try to keep the standards. Every country is different. I totally agree with what you said. But we're seeing that even in APAC, in Europe, Australia, US, California, as I mentioned, they're following GDPR. So it's more about awareness, setting the standards, and then everybody will follow. Great.
Last question? Last question? Yes.
Already was blockchain topic touched, and Nimrod said that customers are right now paying money for companies to not expose data. I know that right now there are some blockchain projects that they focus on the idea that companies will pay you for using your data, I would say, for example. So, what are your thoughts? If this is the future, will this replace what we have now? Because everyone wants to get paid.
And all the companies want the data.
Sure.
I think, by the way, that
Maybe this is a perfect combination, like symbiosis.
I mean, I think it's interesting, but I think at least in a short interim, the way that I would think about it is that companies that need the data or don't have huge amounts of data to aggregate, they can afford to buy the data because they need it, they can buy it from different aggregators, and companies that sit on a ton of data, they have they have a great product. They have the ability to kind of charge you if you don't want them to be able to use any of your data. And I think in any case, there are a lot of models today that also treat data as, as an asset. There are hedge funds. There are different types of financial models that are reliant on aggregation of personal data and information to make, some investments or to make recommendations. So I think these models they exist as well. I don't know if any one of the panel members want to add something to that.
I can say something as always. Okay. So what I think is that it's already happening. When I started the company 2 years ago, I was looking about the data commercialization. And it was like, in the US and Canada, you can buy a record about a person for $200. Let's say that you're an insurance company and I want to make sure that I'm putting the right risk level when I'm giving you a proposal. So I can buy from Axiom, I can buy from different institutes in Canada and the US, a record for any person, actually each one of us, for $200. So it's already there. The thing is that it's the black market right now, and it's going to be more formalized in the future.
Okay, to conclude, I want to share with you a little insight from IBM research that actually showed that over 60% of business leaders think that GDPR is a blessing in disguise because it will reinforce and really have a huge impact on organizations and how they have to think about these new models. How do they change their business models to adhere to the new policy? And although it's really painful, it could be a real driver for technology innovation and at the end of the day, growth for the industry. So I think it's really interesting to see in a year or two from now how it's all gonna play out. Thank you very much, Nimrod, Amnon, and Yariv for joining us today. Thank you, everyone, and see you in the next breakfast event.